Why should it be? Why should it be?
Sure, so just to kind of introduce myself a little bit, obviously I'm Allison Hughes. I've been practicing coming up on 15 years. I was born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio, moved down to Florida in 2004 to go to law school. After law school, I started working for Judicial in St. Johns County, who I saw was interviewed earlier today. I worked with her first as a legal assistant while I was taking the bar and waiting to pass the bar, and then I worked for her as an associate attorney. And during that time, I mostly handled family law cases and some wills, some kind of smaller civil cases, but she was on the court-appointed list for dependency and criminal cases, and so that was really kind of the first time I had any sort of exposure to criminal law. It was not something that was on my radar in any way, shape, or form. But I soon figured out that it was something that really interested me, so I decided the best way for me to get the most amount of experience in criminal defense, thinking in the shortest amount of time, was to work for a public defender's office. So I only applied to public defender's offices, and I accepted a position that was extended to me by Jim Purdy in March of 2009. So I started working with the public defender's office in March of 2009 in our Daytona office on a juvenile delinquency docket for Judge Watson. And at that time, there were four of us. There were four public defenders on the docket, so we were also tasked with doing first appearances out of the jail. So once a week, I would go out to the jail and do first appearances, and that was actually really helpful to me as a brand new attorney in general, and a brand new attorney to the area, because over the course of that year, I appeared in front of every sitting judge in Volusia County. And so that kind of helped me to become more comfortable in the area, kind of transition into my position. And then when I would cover in other courtrooms, I would know the judge, and typically they would remember me, and so it really kind of helped me out a lot in the beginning. I was then moved on to an adult misdemeanor docket in front of Judge Foxman. I was on that docket for 2 years, and that was a really educational time for me. I learned a lot from Judge Foxman. And that was really kind of the first time I thought realistically about being a judge in the future. I don't think anybody could appear in front of Judge Foxman for any length of time without completely idolizing him. He's an amazing judge, and so
Which Foxman?
Judge David Foxman.
Okay.
And so he's always been very encouraging and supportive to me. So I was on that docket for about 2 years, and then I moved on to an adult felony docket in front of Judge Hutchison. That was also a very important time for me. I also learned a lot. I had a lot of trials. I handled a lot of really complex criminal cases. And being one to never shy away for asking for help, I worked with some of our most experienced attorneys in our offices because I would kind of jump on their cases, they would help me out in my case. So I really learned a lot in that time period. But I felt like I was kind of had a calling with working with the juveniles. And so Mr. Purdy was kind enough to make that happen. And in July of 2013, I moved to our DeLand office and took over our juvenile delinquency docket in DeLand. I also handled our adult felony drug court docket, and I also served as a mentor to our misdemeanor attorneys. And then in August of 2018, I was asked to become the division chief of our entire DeLand office. So since that time, I have maintained my juvenile delinquency docket. I've handled that docket now for the last 9.5 years. But I'm also the supervising attorney for 8 felony attorneys, 4 misdemeanor attorneys, an appellate attorney. I'm the supervising attorney for our East Side delinquency docket, as well as 5 legal assistants, and we have currently 2 interns. So while I have admittedly been assigned to a relatively niche docket as a juvenile delinquency, I've really never been out of handling all other sorts of criminal cases because being the division chief. I want to become a judge. I think it is a natural progression for me in my career. I am kind of in the first third, maybe first half of my career. I have plenty of time to be impactful as a judge. I've been very lucky to appear in front of a lot of really inspirational judges who've been very encouraging to me. And I think that being a public defender has offered me some specific qualities and traits that are probably, that are specific to being a public defender. We obviously have incredibly high caseloads. Over the last 14 years that I've been a public defender, I've handled over 6,000 cases. And so you learn how to handle a heavy workload while, without getting overwhelmed, while having patience, while treating people with respect. And I think all of that goes into the appropriate disposition for a judge. So while I think I'm qualified otherwise, I do think that I have the appropriate disposition to be a successful judge.
Obviously, a significant portion of your practice has been oriented towards the criminal arena. There are concerns about the civil area.
Right.
And the seat actually initially would be in civil. So that's a different animal. Mm-hmm. And so how do you expect to navigate that? And if you were put on the short list, what would you do between now and the time of the appointment?
Sure. So first off, I think going into any circuit court position, obviously, at some point, assuming I spent the rest of my career on the bench, at some point I would probably transition into an area of law that wouldn't be my expertise. So I understand this is essentially where I would be starting if I got this position. So I think that I would approach it in the same way that I have approached any other docket that I got moved on to, where I was had a little bit of a learning curve. First thing I would do would get a mentor. I would do a lot of shadowing. I would ask a lot of questions, and I would do the studying and do the work that I needed to do to get caught up. When I came into our felony docket as a felony attorney, I had a lot of cases that were older and that were kind of ripe for trial, ripe for hearings and things like that. And so I was going into the courtroom being really, quite frankly, the least experienced attorney in the courtroom. And that's not something that I could do anything about. It's not something that I could help. But I decided that while I was going to be the least experienced attorney walking into that courtroom, I was going to make sure that I was always going to be the most prepared attorney walking into that courtroom. And so that's really the same mindset that I have taken in any new docket or new area of law that I've had to cover is I will do the work that I have to do to get caught up, but I think preparation is really 90% of it. My husband and I don't have kids. He is going to be retiring here in the next year, so he can stay home and let the dogs out. I can put the long hours in and do the work needed to do to make sure that I have the expertise level needed to preside over that courtroom.
So you've obviously effectuated a balance with the public defender's office, and I think your husband is in the sheriff's department. Is that right, or what?
So he works for the DeLand Police Department.
DeLand Police Department. And so you've been able to navigate that arena reasonably well, I assume.
Yes, yeah. It really hasn't been difficult. While we've been married since 2014, we've been together since August of 2009. So really 13 and a half of the 14 years that I've been a public defender, we've been in a relationship. So there's really no before and after. There's no transition period that you can say, well, before, this is how she had to deal with that. It really hasn't been an issue. I think, if anything, it has benefited me as an attorney, benefited my clients. I think any time that you have an alternative perspective to things, especially as a criminal defense attorney, that only makes you better at being able to make arguments. If I make an argument at a trial in front of a jury or in a hearing in front of a judge, and I only have that perspective as a criminal defense attorney, I'm not going to be very successful because your judge and your jurors aren't criminal defense attorneys. So being able to have that kind of additional perspective based off of our relationship, I think really only benefits me and benefits my clients because you have those kind of additional personal experiences in life. But what it really just boils down to is, you know, if he's involved in a case, I don't handle it. If he's not involved in a case, then, you know, there is an issue.
Can I ask you some questions? One, were you able to watch by Zoom earlier the county?
I did, yes. I signed in at the beginning. That kind of goes to my preparation thing. I had watched a bunch of interviews, and I kind of seen how the setup was going to be.
Sure. So I was CC'd on an email that you received from Volusia Exposed regarding, I guess, a case involving defendant. And just curious, what process do you go through to determine whether there's conflicts? And have you adhered to that process in your practice as a public defender? And would you do so if you're a judge?
Right. So like I said, I mean, it's really pretty simple. If he's involved in the case, I don't handle the case. He gets reassigned to somebody else. If he's not involved in the case, then there's not a conflict. I love my husband, and he happens to be a police officer. That does not mean that I, therefore, as a whole, love every single police officer. It would be the same as if my husband was an accountant or a plumber. It doesn't mean that I love all accountants or plumbers. I still am able to do my job. I certainly have no qualms about filing motions to suppress, motions to dismiss, pointing out any issues that there may be that involves a police officer. Now, am I going to make, you know, crazy frivolous motions against a police officer? No, I'm not. But I wouldn't have done that, you know, whether I was in a relationship with a police officer or not, because that's just not, you know, how I handle cases. So it's really every single one of my cases in the last 14 years has involved police officers, either as a witness or a victim. And so that's over 6,000 cases. So it's something that I don't have a problem dealing with. And if, you know, if I was on the bench, obviously in family law, it wouldn't really be an issue. And if I was in Putnam County, it wouldn't be an issue because my husband works for the Delaney Police Department.
Gotcha. So, as a public defender, have you handled any or been involved in any death penalty cases? And would you be able to impose a death penalty as a circuit court judge, given if the circumstances were appropriate?
Sure. So I have not sat in on any death penalty trials. I certainly have been involved kind of in the background in terms of, you know, discussing things with other attorneys in our office that are handling them, kind of maybe running things by arguments, kind of looking at things, but I have not been assigned to any death penalty cases. We have a specific division that handles that. Our capital division handles our death penalty cases, so because I'm not part of our capital division, that's not something I do. If I was on the bench and I was asked to impose, you know, handling a death penalty case, and the death penalty was the appropriate sentence, then yes, absolutely. I think above all, you're there to impose the law. You're there to follow the law. So if that's what was appropriate, then I wouldn't have an issue doing that.
What does it mean to you when you say follow the law? I mean, how would you implement that in your practice as a judge?
So I think that, you know, especially as a criminal defense attorney, I think sometimes you get the kind of the thought, well, do you want a criminal defense attorney being a judge because they think nobody should, you know, have to get in trouble for breaking the law, which is absolutely not the case whatsoever. I think criminal defense attorneys, if anything, you know, I absolutely believe that people should follow the law. I just define people as everyone, including citizens, police officers, prosecutors, judges. Everybody has laws and rules that dictate their role. And as a society, we each have to follow those laws and rules. And so, so as long as everybody does that, then, you know, whatever outcome, whether it be jury trial or plea, is ultimately a just outcome. And so, as a judge, you're going to have certainly situations where you have discretion, and I think that's where you're most, you're gonna have to rely on a really 50-50 combination of common sense and compassion. You do have to understand that there's human beings beyond the paperwork, and that's something that I've learned, obviously, as a public defender, that they're not just cases, there are human beings. But that doesn't mean that if an appropriate remedy is incarceration, or if that's, what the law requires, then that I wouldn't be able to do that.
Have you kept up with any of the changes to Chapter 61, the dissolution chapter, since you left Anne Marie's office?
I have not.
You also said that, in regard to there's a death division that handles these things, and so it's not part of your practice, and so you don't really know that. When did you think that you might like to become a circuit judge? And because it would seem that you had a resource internal to you to have you even better prepared on the criminal side for all aspects, but maybe just didn't take advantage of it, and then that's where I'm trying to figure out how that's gonna occur in the civil arena.
So, is the question why I haven't handled death penalty?
No, the question is, why haven't you availed yourself of the exposure to those who handle the death penalty cases so you could appreciate the mindset that may be involved if called upon as a circuit judge? And the corollary question is the same thing.
Oh, gotcha.
As
Okay.
the civil.
So, I absolutely have. So in our office, I don't know if any of you know Jim Valerino. He was our longtime capital attorney in DeLand. He retired a number of years ago. I spoke with him in hours. He had the most incredible, stories about his cases and things like that. But we're also, as the division chief of my office, so we are working to include some attorneys who are kind of coming up into our capital division. So I have at least 3 felony attorneys right now in my office who are working with our capital division to get certified to handle the death penalty cases. So when a death penalty case comes up, I am part of that discussion of who would be appropriate to help work out on that case. I certainly, as a supportive supervisor, I watch the trials, the death penalty case that was up in Bunnell County. Recently, watched the trial, and really try to be as supportive as possible. So while I'm not part of that division, it's not a situation where, it's a separate office somewhere and I never see these people and I never talk to them. It's really, it's our cases that I'm particularly assigned to, but it's certainly something that I'm peripherally involved in.
So if your name were to go up, what would you do between the time of the name going up and the date of the selection? What would you be doing?
So, knowing that one of the things that would likely be a strong discussion would be my lack of family law experience or civil experience, I would contact one of the civil attorneys. Obviously, Judge Jolly's on my reference list. She's not handling family cases, but she's handling civil cases. Judge Kelly is currently in DeLand handling our family law cases, and he would be a wonderful judge to shadow and certainly pick his brain about the appointment process. And so that's essentially what I would do. I would try to spend as much time as I could with the judges assigned to that division, sit in their courtrooms, ask them questions, and really try to, prepare myself for that as much as I can.
Tell me a little bit about your involvement with the Order of the Eastern Star. Is that something you do regularly, and what kind of things are you doing with that?
So the Order of the Eastern Star is a Masonic organization, and it is something that I'm heavily involved in. It is an organization, the way that I always try to explain it, so most people have heard of the Freemasons, you have the Masons, right? It's kind of an umbrella term. There's a lot of organizations that fall under that Masonic umbrella, to include Eastern Star and the International Order for Rainbow for Girls, which I'm on the advisory board for. So the Order of the Eastern Star, when I was first kind of talking to members about joining, Mainly because my grandfathers were Masons, my grandmothers were part of the Eastern Star. And I really wanted to kind of connect with them better, and so I thought about joining. And so when I asked, kind of like, what is this all about? What is the organization about? What they told me, and what I think is a really good explanation is, we promote love of God, love of country, and being the most productive citizen that you can be. And so it's really promoting those values. It's a lot of service. We are the Eastern Star chapter. We are the sponsoring body for the International Order for Rainbow for Girls, which is the young ladies version. And they do a lot of service projects. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Camp Boggy Creek. So that's really their main service project is Camp Boggy Creek. And so through them, I've been able to tour Camp Boggy Creek a number of times. We do a lot of service projects to donate money to them. And so it's really kind of, it's an organization that really promotes individuals being the best citizen that they can be.
Other questions? Well, anything else that you might like to add, or put a circle and an extra star around?
You guys have a lot of really good questions. I think we've pretty much covered it. Oh, well, I guess the one thing. So the reason why I'm applying now is I don't really go into anything without fully thinking it through. And if I were to be appointed, you have to assume that you're going to have opposition in the upcoming election. And so I do want to emphasize that I'm fully prepared to do that. I, again, am in a position where I can really focus on my career and focus on that. And so, I do want that to be known, that I would be fully able, willing to defend any seat that I were to.
What do you think the budget would be?
So, when I worked for Anne Marie, she ran a campaign, a county board campaign. And so.
The circuit is, it is.
Huge.
Right.
Huge.
Right, so I know she fundraised, if my memory serves me, about $40,000, so I know it would be, more than that, but through a lot of my ties, legal ties, and then through the Masonic organizations, I think I would be able to campaign across the
And it is one of the toughest positions to run for,
Right.
given the constraints that exist.
Yes.
So it's, getting money too can be the challenge.
I had an unnamed judge tell me this statistic, and it kind of just blew my mind. By population, the 7th Judicial Circuit is bigger than 6 states.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's,
I mean, think about that. That's
it's
pretty unbelievable.
It's huge.
Well, 2 years ago, Mr. Purdy retired, and so we had three candidates running for his position. I watched all of their campaigns very closely because obviously it was going to impact me depending on who was going to win. And Mr. Metz won, and he ran a phenomenal campaign. I think what I really learned from watching him is you just have to get out there in every single event and make your face out there, put your face, your name, and be there 100% dedicated to that. And so,
How do you do that and run a courtroom?
well, that's a good question. I would probably ask some other judges who went through the process.
All right. Thank you very much for taking the time to the application.
Absolutely. I appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
But real quick, Ms. Hughes, I'm gonna be the one calling you. There's a phone number listed in the application, a good number. Yeah, there's a cell number, is that good?
Yes.
And then we're gonna call tomorrow?
Correct.
Okay, so there won't
The
be.
interviews won't be concluded until
Right.
tomorrow.
Okay. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.